Let me tell you a story about betrayal, resilience, and the ultimate reckoning. It's a story of love tested by deceit, of a woman who refused to be broken, and of karma making its grand return. This is not just a tale, it's a reckoning. Chapter 1. Whispers of the Past. Shah and I had built a beautiful life together, but it was always haunted by the shadows of his past. Diane, his high school ex, and his mother, Sharon, had made it their mission to undermine me at every turn. Despite their cruel remarks and attempts to make me feel inferior, I never let them see me falter. I knew their game and I refused to play by their rules. But little did I know, fate was about to turn the tables in a way none of us could have expected. For years I endured subtle jabs and calculated digs. Diane, ever the manipulator, would flash a knowing smirk whenever Sharon sang her praises. It was always in the form of a joke, always something I wasn't supposed to take seriously. "Oh, Diane was such a sweetheart, wasn't she, Shaw?" Sharon would say at family gatherings. She always knew how to keep things fun. I would smile politely, feigning indifference, while Shaw's grip on my hand tightened under the table. I had seen through their act from the beginning. Diane wasn't just an ex, she was the ghost of Sharon's perfect vision for Shaw's future. And no matter how much time passed, they refused to let her go. But I wasn't about to let them win. I had played their game for years, staying composed, giving them nothing to feed on. And I had every intention of continuing that streak. Until Sharon's birthday. 3 days ago, Sharon turned 49. She had thrown a lavish party as she always did. This time, however, Shaw and I had another engagement to attend, his co-worker's engagement party. It was an event he didn't want to miss, and I was relieved for an excuse to skip yet another Diane-infested family gathering. But Sharon wouldn't have it. She pushed and pleaded, layering guilt on Shaw until he relented. The moment we stepped into the house, I knew something was wrong. Diane was there as expected, but there was an air of anticipation in the room. The way people glanced between Shaw and Diane, the hushed murmurs, I felt it in my bones. Something was about to happen. Then came the cakes. 2 cakes were rolled out. One said, "Happy birthday, Sharon." The other, in bold, glittering letters, read, "Happy almost anniversary, Shaw." The room went silent. Diane, as if on cue, grabbed Shaw's arm and pulled him into the center of the room. He stiffened under her touch, but she pressed on, her voice syrupy sweet. "10 years ago," she began, looking up at him with teary eyes, "on this very day, you gave me a promise ring. And I've never taken it off." Gasps rippled through the guests. My stomach clenched, my heart pounded. Sharon beamed, as though witnessing the reunion she had always dreamed of. And then Diane raised her hand, the ring catching the light. That was the moment I knew, this wasn't just another passive-aggressive jab. This was war. Chapter 2. A Stage for Betrayal. The shock of Diane's declaration hadn't worn off when Sharon clasped her hands together and cooed, "Oh, how romantic. Young love never truly fades, does it?" My pulse pounded in my ears, but I forced myself to stay composed. If they wanted a reaction from me, they wouldn't get one so easily. Shaw took a step back from Diane, his expression dark. "What are you doing?" he demanded, his voice sharp with irritation. Diane's smile faltered for just a moment before she recovered, looking around as if expecting applause. "I just thought it would be a nice surprise," she said sweetly. A walk down memory lane. But I wasn't the only one who saw through her charade. Shaw's father, who had been mostly silent through Sharon's antics, cleared his throat and folded his arms. "That's enough, Diane." His voice was firm, carrying an unspoken warning. For the first time, uncertainty flickered across Diane's face. I watched as she turned to Shaw, desperation creeping into her voice. "You used to love me, Shaw. We had plans. You promised me forever." Shaw's jaw tightened. "And you broke up with me." Diane shook her head, her fingers tightening around his wrist. "I needed to explore the world. I needed time. But I always planned on coming back to you. I had heard enough." I took a step forward, my voice calm but unwavering. "That's the problem, Diane. You didn't expect him to move on. But he did. With me." The room felt like it held its breath. Sharon's smile faded into something almost menacing, her eyes narrowing as she looked between me and Shaw. "Well," she said smoothly, "we should celebrate the past just as much as the future." Shaw let out a humorless chuckle. "No, Mom. We shouldn't." And just like that, the energy in the room shifted. Diane's perfect plan had backfired spectacularly. Instead of rekindling old flames, she had exposed herself for what she truly was, a woman grasping at the ashes of something long dead. But I knew this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Chapter 3. The Breaking Point. Shah's words echoed through the room like a final verdict, but the battle was far from over. Diane's carefully crafted mask of confidence cracked, her eyes darting around the room, searching for an ally. Sharon, ever the master manipulator, was quick to recover, smoothing down the front of her dress as she took a step forward. "Oh Shah," she sighed, placing a hand over her heart. "No one is saying you have to forget the past. We're just reminiscing. That's what families do after all." I clenched my jaw. The way she twisted the situation, making it seem like an innocent trip down memory lane instead of a deliberate attempt to humiliate me, made my blood boil. I had played this game long enough to know that reacting with anger would only feed into her narrative. Instead, I straightened my spine and smiled. "Well," I said, tilting my head slightly, "if we're reminiscing, then maybe we should also talk about why Diane left in the first place. About how she needed time to explore other men before deciding if Shah was worth coming back to." A murmur rippled through the guests. Diane's face paled, her lips parting as if to speak, but she hesitated. Sharon's eyes flashed with anger, but she maintained her composed facade. Now, Sharon said, her voice taking on a condescending edge. "There's no need to bring up old wounds. This is supposed to be a celebration." I could almost laugh. Old wounds? She and Diane had been prying those wounds open since the day I walked into this family. Shah shook his head. "Mom, I'm done with this." His voice was firm, his tone final. "You and Diane have been playing this game for years, and I let it slide because I didn't want to cause a rift in the family. But enough is enough. This was supposed to be your birthday, and you turned it into a spectacle." Diane finally found her voice. "Shah, please," she pleaded, reaching for his hand, but he took a deliberate step back. "No," he said sharply. "You humiliated my wife in front of everyone. And for what? Some desperate attempt to relive the past." The room was thick with tension. Sharon's lips pressed into a thin line, her eyes flickering between Shah and me. It was as if she was calculating her next move, but before she could speak, Shah reached for my hand. "We're leaving," he announced. "Happy birthday, Mom." Without another word, we turned and walked toward the door. Behind us, whispers filled the air, speculation and judgment spreading like wildfire. As we stepped outside, the cool night air hit my face, and for the first time in years, I felt like we were finally taking control of our own story. But I knew Sharon and Diane wouldn't go down without a fight. This wasn't over. Chapter 4: Shadows of Retaliation. As Shah and I stepped out into the night, the weight of the evening still pressed against us. The cold air felt refreshing after the suffocating hostility inside Sharon's house, but I knew better than to think we had won. If anything, this was just the beginning of something far more dangerous. Shah's grip on my hand was firm, his jaw tight with anger. He had always been patient, always tried to see the good in people, even his mother, but tonight had finally shattered that illusion. He wasn't just angry, he was done. And I knew Sharon wouldn't take that lightly. "We should have left years ago," Shah muttered as we reached our car. His hands trembled slightly as he pulled out his keys. "I should have cut them off before they had the chance to pull something like this." I touched his arm gently. "You did what you thought was best. You wanted to keep the peace." He let out a bitter laugh. "Peace? That wasn't peace. That was control. And I let them have it for too long." We drove home in silence, but my thoughts were anything but quiet. Diane's desperation, Sharon's calculating stare, they weren't going to let this go. The next morning, my suspicions were confirmed. Shah's phone buzzed constantly, messages from family members who had concerns about last night. Some were subtle, asking if he was okay, while others were outright blaming me for turning him against his own mother. But the real bombshell came when Shah checked his email. "They wouldn't," he muttered, scrolling through a lengthy message. His face went pale as he turned the phone toward me. It was an email from his workplace. A formal complaint had been filed against him, accusing him of inappropriate workplace behavior and hostile conduct. My stomach dropped. "This is Sharon and Diane," I whispered. "They're trying to destroy you." Shah's eyes darkened. They just made the biggest mistake of their lives. For years we had played their game, taking their jabs, pretending their insults didn't cut deep. But now they were attacking Shah's career, his reputation. This wasn't just a family feud anymore. This was war. Chapter 5: The Counterattack. The moment Shah read the email, I knew there was no turning back. This wasn't just another petty stunt from Sharon and Diane. This was a full-scale attempt to ruin his life. And they expected us to take it lying down? They had no idea who they were dealing with. Shah exhaled sharply, his hands gripping the phone so tightly that I thought it might crack. "They want to play dirty? Fine. I'll show them how dirty I can get. I placed my hand on his arm, steadying him. We need to be smart about this. If they're willing to go this far, there's no telling what else they have planned. He nodded, his jaw clenched. First things first, I need to talk to my boss before this spirals out of control. That same morning, Shah scheduled a meeting with his manager. By the time he arrived at the office, the rumor mill was already in full swing. Colleagues who had once greeted him warmly now exchanged nervous glances. The damage was already being done. His boss, Mr. Grayson, leaned back in his chair and studied Shah with an unreadable expression. This complaint is serious, Shah. If there's any truth to it. There isn't, Shah interrupted firmly. And I can prove it. He pulled out his phone, scrolling through old messages from Diane. Messages where she had shamelessly flirted with him even after we got married, texts filled with subtle manipulation, and, most importantly, the evidence that she had threatened him before. Mr. Grayson read through them carefully, his expression shifting from skepticism to intrigue, then finally to disgust. This woman, he muttered, shaking his head. She really thought she could pull this off? Shah nodded. And my mother? She's just as guilty. She's been enabling Diane for years. Mr. Grayson sighed. I'll have HR investigate this thoroughly. But from what I see here, you have a solid case. Relief flooded through me when Shah told me what happened. But we weren't done yet. If Sharon and Diane thought they could manipulate people into turning against us, then it was time to flip the script. Later that night, I made a call to an old friend, a journalist who specialized in exposing workplace scandals. If Sharon and Diane wanted to destroy Shah's reputation, we'd make sure the truth about them was out there first. The next morning, an article went live on a popular news site. It detailed the harassment Shah had faced, the toxic family dynamics, and Diane's desperate attempts to ruin his career. Screenshots of her messages were included. The public outrage was immediate. By noon, Diane's social media accounts were flooded with angry comments. Sharon's reputation in her social circles took a massive hit. And just like that, the tables had turned. When my phone buzzed later that evening, I wasn't surprised to see Sharon's name on the screen. But when I answered, it wasn't anger I heard in her voice. It was fear. Chapter 6, The Desperate Gamble. Sharon's voice on the other end of the phone was a mixture of forced composure and barely concealed panic. It was the first time in years I had heard her sound anything less than completely in control. That alone told me we had hit our mark. You went too far, she hissed, her voice trembling slightly. You didn't have to humiliate us like this. I leaned against the kitchen counter, my grip on the phone tightening. Oh, you mean like the way you and Diane have been humiliating me for years? The way you tried to destroy Shah's career? That kind of humiliation. There was silence on the other end. Then a sigh. You don't understand what you've done, she murmured. People are talking. My friends, my reputation. I let out a humorless laugh. You should have thought about that before you tried to ruin your own son's life. Shah walked into the kitchen then, his brows raised in question. I held up a finger, signaling him to wait. Sharon's voice turned sharper, desperation bleeding into it. Diane is in shambles. She's been crying all day. She might do something drastic. I narrowed my eyes. You're seriously trying to guilt me over Diane? After everything she's done? She's not as strong as you are, Sharon said. You don't know what she's capable of when she's pushed too far. For the first time, there was something in Sharon's voice that sent a chill down my spine. A genuine warning. I glanced at Shah, who was now watching me intently. Are you saying Diane is going to hurt herself? I asked carefully. Sharon hesitated. Or someone else, she admitted. She's not thinking clearly. You backed her into a corner. I swallowed. This was what narcissists did when they lost control. They turned unpredictable, reckless. And Diane had lost everything. We should take this seriously, I murmured to Shah after I hung up. Diane isn't stable. Shah exhaled sharply. She never was. But now she's dangerous. That night, I double-checked that our doors were locked. And as I lay in bed, unable to sleep, I had the sinking feeling that this wasn't over. No, this was just the calm before the storm. Chapter 7, The Storm Breaks. The next morning, an eerie silence hung over the house. Shah was already awake, sitting at the kitchen table, his phone in hand, scrolling through messages. His face was unreadable, but I could tell something wasn't right. What is it? I asked, pouring myself a cup of coffee. He didn't look up. Diane is missing. I froze. Missing? What do you mean missing? She didn't come home last night. Her friends haven't heard from her. Sharon's losing her mind. A chill ran down my spine. I wanted to believe that Diane was just playing another manipulative game trying to garner sympathy. But something about this felt different. Shaw placed his phone down and rubbed his temples. Her car was found abandoned a few miles outside town. No sign of her. I swallowed hard. Do you think she? I don't know. His voice was tight with frustration. But I know that if something happens to her, they're going to blame us. It was a terrifying thought. Sharon was already furious over the article and the public humiliation. If Diane turned up hurt, or worse, there was no telling what Sharon would do. By noon, the police were involved. Officers questioned Shaw about his last interaction with Diane, scrutinizing every word as if searching for a hidden confession. I could feel the tension rising, the way the walls were slowly closing in on us. Then at 3 p.m. a message arrived. It was from Diane's phone. The text was short, cryptic. Asterisk, you did this to me. Now it's your turn to suffer. Asterisk. Shaw read it aloud, his hands shaking. She's trying to frame us. A sharp knock at the door made us both jump. Through the peephole, I saw 2 officers standing there, serious expressions on their faces. The storm had officially broken. Chapter 8. The trap is set. The moment I opened the door, I knew this was no casual visit. The 2 officers standing before us had the kind of grim expressions that sent a sinking feeling straight into my gut. Mr. Shaw, Mrs. Shaw, the taller one said. We need to ask you a few questions about Diane Matthews. Shaw squared his shoulders. Of course. Come in. The officers stepped inside, their eyes scanning the room as if they expected to find some kind of damning evidence lying around. I sat down next to Shaw, trying to keep my hands steady. When was the last time you had contact with Diane? The second officer asked, flipping open a notepad. Yesterday afternoon, Shaw said. She sent me a message. It was vague, accusatory. He handed over his phone, displaying the text Diane had sent. Asterisk, you did this to me. Now it's your turn to suffer. Asterisk. The officers exchanged glances. She's missing, the first officer said. Her mother believes you 2 had something to do with it. I clenched my jaw. Of course Sharon was trying to pin this on us. Shaw kept his voice even. Diane has a history of manipulation. I wouldn't put it past her to stage something like this. We're not saying you're guilty, the officer replied carefully. But the fact remains, she's disappeared and we have to follow every lead. The conversation went on for nearly an hour, every question digging deeper, looking for cracks in our story. But there were none. We had done nothing wrong. When they finally left, I let out a long breath. This is bad, I murmured. Really bad. Shaw nodded. She's playing a game and we're the targets. That night, my phone buzzed with another message. This time it was a video. I hesitated before pressing play, my heart hammering in my chest. The screen flickered, revealing a dimly lit room. And then I saw her, Diane, sitting in a chair, her face streaked with tears. They did this to me, she whispered, looking straight into the camera. If anything happens to me, you'll know who to blame. The video cut off. I turned to Shaw, my blood running cold. She's setting us up. And just like that, the trap had been set. Chapter 9. The Noose Tightens. The next morning, the video had gone viral. Every social media platform was flooded with posts about Diane's disappearance, her tearful plea echoing through countless shares and comments. The court of public opinion had already reached its verdict. We were guilty. Shaw's phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Friends, co-workers, even distant relatives were reaching out, some offering support, others demanding answers. Sharon, of course, wasted no time in fueling the fire. She appeared on a local news segment, her voice trembling with perfectly rehearsed grief. I just want my baby back, she sobbed. She was so afraid of them. She told me if anything happened to her, they would be responsible. I clenched my fists as I watched. Every carefully chosen word was designed to paint us as villains. It was working. The police arrived at our doorstep that afternoon. This time they weren't just asking questions. We have a warrant to search your home, one officer announced, handing Shaw a sheet of paper. Step aside. I felt the walls closing in as they moved past us, opening drawers, checking every room. Shaw remained eerily calm, his hands clenched at his sides. This is insane, I whispered. They're treating us like criminals. They want to find something, he muttered. Anything that connects us to her. Hours passed, and though they found nothing, the damage was done. The search itself would be enough to cast more doubt in the public's eyes. By evening, another video surfaced. This one was shorter. Darker. Diane's voice shook as she whispered, I don't have much time. Please don't let them get away with this. The screen flickered, then went black. Shaw exhaled sharply. she's tightening the noose. I swallowed the lump in my throat. If we didn't find a way to fight back soon, we were going to be buried alive. Chapter 10. The Truth Unveiled. The walls were closing in, the weight of suspicion suffocating us. But we weren't going down without a fight. We needed proof, something that would expose Diane's twisted game before it was too late. Shaw spent the night digging through old messages, emails, anything that could provide a crack in Diane's carefully woven story. And then, finally, he found it. A message from Diane to one of her closest friends, sent a week before her supposed disappearance. Asterisk. If things don't go my way, I'll make sure they regret everything. They'll never see it coming. Asterisk. It was vague, but it was enough. We took it straight to the police. At first, they were hesitant. Diane had played the victim too well. But when they traced her last known location, they found something even more damning. Security footage from a gas station outside of town. Footage of Diane, alive and well, laughing with a man no one recognized. It wasn't just a lie. It was an elaborate hoax. The news broke the next morning, and just like that, the tide turned. Public outrage shifted from us to Diane. Her fabricated disappearance, her staged videos, they were all part of a sick plan to ruin us. As the truth spread, Sharon's facade crumbled. She tried to defend Diane, but the evidence was undeniable. Soon, she stopped answering reporters, her public cries of concern vanishing into silence. Days later, Diane was found in a motel on the outskirts of the city, still playing the victim. But this time no one believed her. The police took her into custody, charging her with fraud, defamation, and obstruction of justice. The nightmare was finally over. Shaw and I sat on our porch that evening watching the sunset in silence. The weight on our shoulders had lifted, but the scars remained. She almost won, I murmured. Shaw reached for my hand, his grip firm and reassuring. But she didn't. We had survived the storm. And as we sat there, side by side, I knew one thing for certain. Karma had finally struck back. And, lesson to learn. Life will throw challenges your way, and sometimes people will try to bring you down, but the truth always finds a way to surface. No matter how dark the situation seems, stay strong, stay positive, and believe in justice. In the end, karma always delivers what is deserved. If you enjoyed this story and its twists and turns, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Your support means the world and helps us bring you more engaging stories. Stay positive and keep moving forward.